Hi, my name is Rob Fisher, and I own a company called Fisher Improvement Technologies, and we partner with Equilibria on advanced error reduction in organizations. There's been a lot of talk out there about HOP principles, human and organizational principles, and we want to spend a little time talking about the intentional and practical application of these principles. We need to move them from being a principle, just a theory or something that's out there, to something tangible, something that you can use with intentionality. And in order to do that, you really have to do three things. You've got to know some different things. You've got to say some different things. You've got to do some different things. And it's not all that hard. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey from where a lot of organizations are at to where you can be over a very short period of time and have it improve your capability to be a more intentional leader. So we start with something we call the gear model. Now, picture your organization as a machine. In the gear model, what we say is what we really want are these outcomes. But everything starts with leader knowledge. Leaders know certain things. You've known certain things your entire career. You learn things along the way. But when you learn something new or you learn to apply something, that starts those gears turning of that machine in your organization. You don't want to just know things to know them. You want to know things so that you change things for the better. Once you learn something, once your knowledge changes, that starts to give you the ability to intentionally change what you say, the leader language, and what you do, your leader behaviors. So leader knowledge is directly coupled to leader language and behaviors. If you learn something and you really learn it well and it's new knowledge, then that will change what you say and what you do. And what we really want ultimately is these better outcomes. And part of those outcomes is, what are the workers doing and saying in the field? Are they doing things better? Are they following more processes? Are they getting better outcomes? And you may notice that in this gear model, that's not directly coupled. One of the mistakes many organizations make is they believe that those gears are meshed together. They're really pulled together with a belt, and that belt is engagement. And the way you engage determines whether you're going to get the better outcomes, whether they're cultural outcomes, whether they're values outcomes, physical outcomes, safety, quality, effectiveness, productivity. All of those outcomes can be determined by how you engage and get feedback. Now, notice if that belt is too tight, you're going to have an inefficient machine. If that belt is too loose, you're probably going to have friction. So part of the talent of intentionality, being an intentional leader, is knowing how to manage the tightness of that belt that then drives more effective and efficient workforce language and behavior changes that give you better outcomes. And again, those better outcomes can be physical or through cultural values and norm systems. But I want you to think back and use this gear model when you're thinking about how to move your organization forward with intentionality. And I love Sidney Decker and I were talking one day, and he said, if you want to shift somebody's paradigm, Rob, you got to give them a paradigm more powerful than one you're asking them to leave. And when I think about that, the only way for us to have a discussion about changing the paradigms related to HOP principles are to understand where that goes. So let's look at what many organizations do. I'm not saying this is going to be your organization, but you've probably seen this before. We have an incident, and that incident starts a cycle. So we have an incident. First thing we want to do is say, all right, well, let's identify the incident. Then we go out and we find the error that was close to the incident. What did Bob or Jill do? Next thing we do is we have some kind of immediate reaction as an individual and an organization. And that kind of results in blame, whether we intend to or not. Now that we've done all that, somebody goes off and analyzes it or uses your cause analysis or incident analysis or learning team process to analyze it, because then we want to correct it so that we don't have this incident again. The problem is the way this typically works in an organization is when we identify that incident, we characterize it. Maybe it's a near miss, a near hit, a lost work day. Maybe it's lost production. We characterize it in this way that we've predetermined for the event. And then what that leads us to is say, okay, we found the error. We start asking questions like, what did that person do wrong? Why did they violate the procedure? You hear the word people violating procedure an awful lot. And then that leads to somebody reacting because of what we talked about related to that error. Well, who did that stupid thing? Why did they do that stupid thing? So we're asking these questions before there's an analysis. We're already into reacting and then blaming. What are you going to do to them? Was anybody else involved that we need to talk to? So you see, we're more than halfway around this typical incident cycle. And now we're starting to say, okay, well, we will analyze this. The problem is the analysis that we're going to do is based on all those things that we've already talked about. So it's tainted from the beginning. And then we write corrective actions, even if we did the analysis, and you find corrective action like, okay, we're going to coach and counsel. All right, let's go change the procedure. We don't know whether the procedure was right or wrong, but we're going to change it. Let's coach the supervisor. Let's send out an all hands lessons learned. So again, this is a cycle that many organizations go through. And what that really does is, even though you're using tools to do some of these, those tools are enabling this cycle to perform poorly instead of enabling it to perform well. So let's think about that, the old cycle and the tools that you may use, whether you use a why staircase or learning teams or fact-finding meetings or accountability models. When you pay attention to this cycle the way it's written, and you don't really turn the HOP principles into something that's practically applicable, then your tools just identify the things we just talked about. The why staircase has become opinion based. Well, I think they did this. Why? Because this happened. Why? Because this happened. And we have a saying here at Fisher Improvement Technologies: fact-finding meetings don't. And that's a very simple way to say, when you bring someone into a fact-finding meeting, they're not giving you facts, they're giving you information. The analysis determines whether the information is fact or not. So by you calling it a fact-finding meeting, it's not going to find facts. It's going to find information. And if somebody thinks they've already found the fact, they're not going to seek the real facts. Imagine if somebody called you to their office and you're a leader, and your bossity boss calls you in and says, all right, we're gonna run an accountability model. What do you think they're trying to do? Well, it's right there in the title. You don't need to call things accountability models. It's not necessarily about accountability. And is it reasonable to believe that different personalities will give different information based on how their personality gets approached? And those typically aren't brought into it. So it's not that the traditional tools are all wrong, but their application can lead to bad outcomes. So let's talk about a little bit about how that's been working in industry in general. So serious injuries and fatalities are flat. There's been no significant drop in serious injuries and fatalities, even though we've tried to do all of these things related to safety. Organizations continue to be surprised by events, especially catastrophic events. Organizations have repeat incidents. We just had this happen 6 months ago. I was talking to somebody at a large construction site, and they said, we just don't understand it. We had somebody do this 8 months ago. We sent out a memo on it. We educated everything. We put it in the training, and here we have it happen again. It tends to lead to low worker engagement. Why would somebody want to engage with me if they think I'm running an accountability model? They're not going to volunteer that engagement. We want the workers to engage because we're all thinking the right things, saying the right things, and doing the right things. And if we do that, trust will be high. But in most organizations, not only is trust low, but the leaders don't know that trust is low until some kind of survey tells them that. And then they're surprised by it. So we'll talk a little bit about later on the essential leadership cycle to help with that. The other thing is that accountability in many organizations that fall almost victim to this typical incident cycle is that accountability is always a problem. always talking about accountability. So you can see that using this cycle that we think we're doing okay is working for us. But what it's resulting in are all of these things and high turnover. So what we have to do is think about this from a different way. We don't want to engage that cycle the way we've been doing it in the past. That means we can still use some of the attributes, but we've got to know different things about it. We've got to say different things about it. We've got to do different things. We've got to think differently. We've got to speak differently, and we've got to act differently to do better. So let's talk about how we do that. In other words, how do you use and know the HOP principles and then use those with intentionality? So if you read Todd Conklin's book on the five HOP principles, then I'm just going to cover those right here, and then we're going to back up to them to say, that's not just a principle. It's a way that you can approach things with intentionality. The first one's error is normal. Number 2 is blame fixes nothing. Number 3 is systems drive behaviors. Number 4 is response matters. And number 5 is learning is essential. Now, we can just use those as principles and you can have conversations about those, and that's fine. But what we want to do is take that to the next level and say, okay, but how do you do those things? How do you make that a part of how we think and how we do business in our organization? So let's look at error as normal. When you start breaking down error as normal, there's some sub attributes. One of the things you have to understand is that people are fallible and even the best will make mistakes. Well, why do you think some of your best people make some of your biggest mistakes? That's because we give them the higher consequence tasks. We give them the most difficult tasks. They've been around longer. They've been successful. Those are systemic drivers. Those are things the organization created. That high-performing individual didn't come in one day and say, well, I think I'm going to screw this up. So all people are fallible, and even the best will make mistakes, and that includes us as leaders. We also have to understand the concept that error is a consequence, not a cause. We tend to look at error as a cause and effect relationship. Rob turned the wrong thing, therefore the plant shut down. But that error of Rob turning the wrong thing, that was a consequence of something else. And if we don't look at errors as an opportunity to learn, we forget that not all error is bad. I mean, we've all used Post-it notes. They started with a mistake. So if you come at things that all error is bad, you miss all of these opportunities to learn. Where most innovation is the result of some kind of error. So many of you out there have innovation as part of your values. We want people to be innovative. We want to spawn innovation. And yet you approach all error like it's bad. Well, how in the world do you think people are going to innovate if they don't make a mistake that then says, so that might lead to this other good outcome? The other thing that many organizations don't do is we say error is normal. I believe all those first 3, but you don't have a definition for error. So if you don't use a science-based definition for error, violation, deviation, then you're not going to understand that it's predictable and preventable, but only if you recognize the vulnerabilities. So if we want to prevent and mitigate and correct errors, we have to make sure that we use those science-based definitions and follow these principles of error as normal. So you need a set of science-based definitions that you always fall back on. Your organization uses them. So let's just look very quickly. The major definitions are error, event. We've got to learn to separate those. Deviation and violation. A violation is just one type of deviation. And then the 2 types of errors, active errors and latent errors. So let's just look at those very quickly. An error is an action or inaction that unintentionally does one of 3 things. It results in an undesirable or unwanted condition. It leads a task or system outside of limits, or it deviates from a set of rules, standards, or expectations. Now, each of those has different attributes. The action is intentional. It's the outcome that is unintentional. but that's different from an event. The event only describes the outcome. So you have to learn to separate errors from events as a leader. The next distinction that needs to be made in the definitions is that a deviation is something you see. I see someone not wearing their safety glasses. A violation is conscious intent to be outside the rule. And errors and violations are different things, and we need to treat them differently. Then we've got two different types of errors: active errors and latent errors. Sharp into the stick, turn wrong switch, wrong thing happens. Open wrong valve, do the wrong thing. Water goes to the wrong place. A latent error is an error that was created some time ago, and now it reveals itself. And that latent error could be a bad procedure. It could be a poorly engineered or designed component. But if leaders don't know the definition of error and use it and the differences between all of these things, it's really hard to get the workforce to believe that you're trying to help them prevent them. So to be an intentional leader, I have to have some core definitions that I constantly fall back on and consistently use individually and as an organization. Let's look a little bit deeper into an error and event. So an error is that action or inaction that unintentionally results in an undesirable or unwanted condition, or unintentionally leads a task or system outside of limits, or unintentionally deviates from a rule, standard, or expectation. The action is intentional, but that event, that outcome is unintentional. Let's look at an example real quick. You've probably, at one point or another, been sitting in this left-hand turn lane. At the left turn signal, you're the first car. And all of a sudden, the lights in the right two lanes to go straight turn green. And you take your foot off the brake and put it on the gas, because your brain sensed two things. It sensed green and it sensed movement. Now, you've taken your foot off the brake and started for the gas, and maybe you instantly realize, oh my gosh, I don't have a green light, and you stop. So you may be beyond the white line. So if you're beyond the white line, your task or system is unintentionally outside the limits. Maybe you went ahead and turned because you never even noticed that your light wasn't red and there was no traffic coming, so you got away with it. You unintentionally deviated from the rule, standard, or expectation. And the first time you figure out that you deviated was somebody slaps you and says, hey, do you know you ran that light back there? And you look at them and say, no, I didn't. I didn't. Yes, you did run that. No, we had a green light. The traffic moved. Everyone who has ever sat the first car at that red light has moved their foot off the gas into the brake, but maybe you didn't have an incident. So the error existed. I've got an undesirable or unwanted condition. But most of us just put our foot back on the brake and we wait it out. That doesn't mean the error didn't occur. So if you think about that from that perspective, a deviation is when we don't strictly comply. We crossed the white line, but we didn't mean to be there. We took the left because we thought the light was green. A violation is when we consciously, intentionally deviate from a rule, standard, or expectation. This is important need for understanding, because we treat everything like it's a violation, even though it probably isn't. Remember, you had to be told going down to the next block that you ran the red light. You didn't consciously, intentionally red light. But some people will look and see the traffic's coming. There's no traffic coming, say, well, I'm just going to run that red light. That would be a violation. So we have to look at things a little bit differently. That light turns and you start to move. If you unintentionally run the light, that's an error. If you intentionally run the light, that's a violation. And if you believe in Deming's principles, the probability that it's a violation is only about 10%. So we need to take that into account. When we talk about error as normal from an e-colors perspective, we have to also understand that we tend to approach error differently based on our personality tendencies. My e-colors are yellow over blue, but as I tell many people, my e-colors are very close together by percentage. They're only 1% apart. So it's pretty easy for me to tap into some of the other e-colors. Some of your e-colors are very specific. Maybe you're a high toppy color green or a high toppy color yellow or red or blue. So it makes it a little bit more difficult to understand where other people are coming from. That means we have to be more intentional and manage our tendencies more effectively. So that toppy color red, when we think about air as normal, and this actually applies to all of the five principles. The toppy color red is that teller. We like what? We're almost a speed listener. We listen for the things we want to hear. When something bad happens, we tend to shame and tell people what I want. Toppy color red, we tend to engage and work on the who elements. We're very yellow. Yes, toppy color yellow. We're very selective as a listener. We tend to interrupt because we want that engagement, and we will tend to name the who's, and we operate a lot off of our feelings. Toppy colored green is an explainer. They like to draw out the how and understand how things. They're more active as a listener, and the back and forth is almost an interrogation for understanding. The toppy colored green tends to be a blamer. They blame and they use I think a lot. The toppy colored blue is more relating, more trying to understand the why and dig a little deeper by nature. They're more of an empathetic listener because they're looking for that relatability and a little bit more introspective. They will tend to complain about the things and use I believe a lot. So again, this is going to apply to all of the principles, but especially when you're trying to normalize air. So I'm going to spend a little time on this slide, but it may be worth pausing here and looking not just at yours, but taking a look at yours and saying, yeah, that makes sense on how I can make an error. But I want you to take a little time and look at the way other people can make an error. So for instance, if I'm a toppy color red, I may want to understand that the toppy color blues may make an error by not saying no or being rushed or getting overwhelmed. If I'm a toppy color yellow, I may understand that I can get it distracted and squirrel, but that toppy color green, their desire for perfection may delay the information long enough so that the event outruns it. So it's really worth on this slide having a little pause in this and having a conversation about not just how you can make an error, but how others can make an error. But think about the power of using this out in the field when people are preparing for a high-risk task, and you as a leader, knowing the e-colors of the individuals, get them in a conversation about how they could make an error based on their personality tendencies, how that might make them vulnerable. Because remember, it's very hard to prevent and mitigate errors that we don't understand we're vulnerable to. Next principle is blame fixes nothing. And that's easy to say, but by our very nature, humans like to blame. It can't be me, so it must be you. Dr. James Reason wrote the book Human Error, and part of the basis for that was the human ego element that says we've got this blame thing. And I'll just throw you something to think about. We hear a lot about organizations having a blame culture. What if it's not a blame culture? What if it's a whole bunch of individuals that have the natural tendency to blame, the human nature characteristic to blame, and they haven't learned how to manage that tendency? But if we learn how to manage the tendency of blame, imagine what doors get open. So when we talk about blame fixing nothing, remember, it is a natural characteristic. It's an air trap because it's a human nature characteristic, just like all the other top 10 air traps. And do you think that blame may force stress or high workload or poor communication or overconfidence or distractions? Because like these other air traps, different personalities will be impacted differently. So if we don't characterize things correctly, we don't understand that you and I may deal with blame, assign blame, and and react to blame differently, then uh, we're not really managing blame. It is a manageable tendency, just like the traps are managed. We can manage our personality tendency and our propensity to blame. We're going to talk about pause and play, personal intervention in a little while. You can use pause and play on blame, just like you can use pause and play on the error traps. So now we're learning that blame fixes nothing is easy to say, but it requires knowledge and action to do something about. See, these HOP principles are not about shifting accountability. For years out there, people used to think that the principles were about shifting the blame from the worker to the manager. It has never been about that. HOP principles aren't about shifting blame and accountability. It's about finding the drivers of errors and events. And we want to find those drivers, those vulnerabilities. We want to find them before they cause something catastrophic to happen. You're not going to do that if you're walking around saying blame fixes nothing, but you're not using personal intervention, not using pause and play. You're not understanding the natural tendency of humans to blame, and you're not managing those tendencies with intentionality. So as I said before, we tend to blame differently. Again, this is a good time to maybe pause this and not just look at and agree with, yeah, I do those. As a toppy color yellow, I do some of those things to blame people. Spend a little time on the other personality types, because this is how they're going to blame you for something. So if you can see it coming, you can manage it. But if you only expect people to blame the way you blame, you're only ever going to manage a quarter of what is manageable with blame. So again, you may want to pause here and just spend a little time, if you're in a group, having a discussion about how people tend to blame. And just as a characteristic, the top half here is we tend to shame and name, and the time is short. We do it pretty quickly. In the middle, we tend to externalize that blame. Down here in the middle to the bottom, we internalize that blame. We take a lot of it on myself. I know a lot of e-colored green, blues, greens, they punish themselves first and a lot, sometimes so much that other people can't learn from it. And then down at the bottom, there's more blaming and complaining, and that time is elongated. It takes a long time for somebody to get over it, and sometimes they just don't get over it. The next human organizational performance principle is systems influence behavior. And I'm going to add to that context actually drives that behavior. So we use the task-based system. And the task-based system says that on any task at any time, an individual is surrounded by other people, programs, processes, work environments, organization, equipment. Those are all dynamic parts of the system. It's an interdependent system. All those things impact each other. They all impact the individual, and the individual impacts all of those things. But the individual in the middle of that system has to be aware of and manage their personality tendencies, because a bad system will beat a good person every time. We're back to Deming's principles. So Deming would say that people can never outperform the system that bounds and constrains them. And in Sidney Decker's book, The Field Guide to Understanding Human Error, he says that people do what they do at the time they do it for reasons that make sense to them at the time. What makes things make sense to people are the attributes of the task-based system. So you can say this all you want, but if you don't give people the system, did you know that different people with different personalities will naturally see risk coming from one place and And it's not natural for them to see risk coming from another place on the task-based system. So our personality tendencies impact the way we perceive that influence. It may be really easy for me to see influence of people in work environment, but somebody else may only see the influence of equipment and processes. So we have to overtly manage. We have to manage with intentionality the tendencies to look for risk coming from the places that we wouldn't naturally see it. And organizational values influence these individual behaviors. The small organizational values are more impactful than the big organizational values. What you put on your website matters way less to someone in the field than the way their supervisor interprets the values that you put on your website. So significant errors can occur at all levels of the organization. And that's why we need error management techniques. They're not error prevention techniques. It's techniques to manage error and vulnerabilities. Because if you think about people doing what they do at the time they do it for reasons that make sense to them at that time, there are two different types of drivers in this system. Individual drivers, like the traps. I may be stressed and the person next to me isn't. I may be under time pressure and the person next to me is. I may be overconfident and the person next to me isn't. Those are individual drivers. Fatigue is an individual driver. But you also have the systemic drivers: people, programs, processes, work environment, organization, equipment. When you do an analysis, do you ask people to look for those systemic drivers? When they're doing their why staircase, are they looking for the systemic drivers that produce the why, or are they just saying because? Another piece of this systems element is what we call work as imagined versus work as done. So you may have seen the work as imagined versus work as done. What you may not know is that from an e-colors perspective or a personality tendency perspective, we actually look at work as imagined differently. So, and we look at how we do work differently. But what's important in the real drift model is that the red parts make up the human adaptability that creates work as done. Work as imagined is the straight line. That's how we write a process, tell people to follow it. But work as done is how we have to adapt. And that may happen at the step or even sub-step or subtask level. But in the end, at the end of that task, especially a high-risk task, do we debrief those gaps of adaptability? Do we collect that knowledge so we discover what we did that was good? And I'll just throw one more at you. Why do we call the things above this line innovation? And we call the things below the line violations. We're still deviating from work as imagined to accomplish work as done. So once again, like the previous three, I would ask you to maybe pause here a minute and not just look at your e-colors for work as imagined versus work as done, but how do other people handle it? And think about how could we incorporate that into our pre-task briefings in a way that we can be a little bit more predictive about how work will be done, and that will reduce incidents. The next top principle is response matters. Now, you notice this doesn't say your reaction matters. There's a difference between a reaction, what we would naturally do, and a response, what would be measured or intentional. You know, very often we run along on autopilot. If we're not managing our tendencies, if we're not being intentional, we're really on autopilot. We're letting our tendencies control how we react to things. So what we have to do to create an intentional response is pull ourselves out of that autopilot. We've got to remember who we're engaging and how that engagement is happening. Remember, engagement is always a two-way street that includes a conversation, not a speech. So the effectiveness of your intentional response requires that engagement, the feedback, the back and forth. So here we come back to where we started, and that is leader knowledge, what you know, leader language, what you say, and leader behaviors, what you do, are what drives effective change. They will see that that is an intentional response. And that intentional response is related to successes and failures. We tend to think that it's only important that we don't react to a failure. But what about how we respond to successes so that we get those learnings? And in order to do that, that's why the tools were created. So if you think about personal intervention, pause and play, and there's two ways. Some of you have wristbands that have pause and play, but you may be in an organization that can't do that. Just picture a pause and play button right there on your wrist and physically touch it when you want to control your fast and slow brain, when you want to control your performance modes, when you want to turn your reaction into a response, when you want to manage the tools, when you want to manage your blame instincts and turn that from a response of blame into or a reaction to blame into a response to understand that blame fixes nothing. So personal intervention, we call it the gateway tool into all of the other HOP tools. And again, you may have a wristband, but if you don't, the physical pushing of a make-believe button on your wrist wires your brain to make sure that your brain is now moving at the speed your body can perform. Well, personal intervention is a valuable tool for turning reactions into responses. So it should be reasonable to believe that different people will react and respond differently based on our personalities. So some of that is going to naturally happen faster for the faster paced personalities, and maybe a little bit more delayed for the personalities that need more information to process. So if we don't know ourselves and our innate tendencies, then we're probably not enabling ourselves and others to be intentional. It's not enough just to tell people to be intentional. You can empower people to do things, and that would be a good first step, but you're not going to get sustainable change until you enable them. So when we talk about response matters, we've put up here how you tend to respond to both successes, good things, and failures, bad things. So again, I'm going to ask you to pause and look at yours and find the ones that most apply to you, but really spend some time, especially if you're in a group, looking at and talking about the other elements, because you need to understand I can't just be self-aware, I've got to be self and team aware. And you can watch for some triggers. You want to make sure that you ask or use and statements instead of buts. So instead of saying, I know you did this, but say, I know you did this and. It helps people understand that we want to know how things happened. We'll figure out why things happen later. We want to use those tools to respond and engage. I hate to say it this way, the final number 5 is learning is essential, but I think you're going to see in a minute we can use this as a cycle. So we use the essential leadership cycle where the last element in the essential leadership cycle before it starts over is learning and continuous improvement. Learning is essential. And the essential leadership cycle says that you can use this as a function of learning. The essential leadership cycle says that we start with self and team awareness. Spend a lot of time on self-awareness. We need some team awareness. That leads to good shared vision and values, where we can use values-based engagements. If you have good self and team awareness, good shared vision and values, you can then start to create clearer roles and processes. We use R2A2, roles, responsibilities, accountabilities, and authorities. Those all need to be covered. If you do those 3 well, Those are the driving elements. And that starts to generate trust. You may not know this, but 2 of the 4 major personality groups think that I should be able to say, trust me, and you should just trust me. 2 of the 4 personality groups think that if you ask me to trust you and you haven't earned it, there must be something going on there. And I think that you can probably relate to one of those 2 things. So what we want to do is to generate trust that will then allow us to be diverse and inclusive. When we say diversity and inclusion, we're not talking about it as the buzzword that's going around. Think about it this way. Diversity is a fact. It's a condition. We are diverse. I'm different from you. You're different from me, physically and in many other ways. But inclusion is a decision. It's an action. It's something you have to do with intentionality. Inclusion doesn't happen unless you are intentionally inclusive. So we want to be inclusive of thought. And personalities will treat that information a little bit differently if you're not careful. So if you want commitment, you have to show commitment. And people will commit to what they trust and how they have been treated related to diversity and their inclusion of thought. And that will lead to accountability. Our experience, we've done over 300 deployments in 40 countries and 10 languages of this information. We've got a little history. Some of our clients are highly reliable, high-performing organizations already. They're already ahead of the game. They're at the top of their game. They want to take that next step. When we go into one of those organizations, you never hear them talk about accountability. It's not because it's not there. It's because I'm accountable to you, you're accountable to me, we're accountable to the system, system's accountable to us, we're accountable to the organization's accountable to us. That accountability is organically developed through a cycle. In other organizations that struggle with accountability, they talk about it all the time. They'll sometimes bring somebody in with an iron fist saying, "Oh, we're going to start holding people accountable." That person stays around for a couple of years, gets frustrated, they leave somewhere else and bring somebody in with a bigger fist. In many organizations, they misplace accountability because they misunderstand it. They'll say, self-team awareness, going to hold you accountable. Shared vision and values, going to hold you accountable. Clear rules and processes, going to hold you accountable. But you don't need to do that if accountability is part of the process, part of the model that you use to learn. Learning is essential. And if you follow this process, if you type Essential Leadership Cycle podcast into any search engine, you'll get 50 or 60 episodes of how to apply the Essential Leadership Cycle. That ultimately ends in learning being essential. How do we learn? Because in the end, learning doesn't happen until behaviors change. You can use the Essential Leadership Cycle to manage the outcomes. So unless behaviors are changed, unless the workforce and your peers see something different, oh, by the way, isn't that the last part of the first gears in the gear model? Change leader knowledge, change leader language, change leader behaviors. And because we treat these things a little bit differently, it becomes important that we manage our personality traits. So if you think about this, the faster paced personalities, we think we get it quickly. We're okay failing our way to success. I've had conversations with some of the green-blue and blue-green personalities, and they'll just shake their head with the belief that failing your way to success is okay. We tend to believe that if we learn it, if we believe we learned it, everybody learned it. But that the e-colors blue and green, because they need time to process, they need time to process for learning as well. They're not okay with failing their way to success. And then they want to share that information with others. In other words, I want to share what I've learned, as opposed to other people learned it at the same time I did. So when you can also look at it from side to side. The topic color reds and greens, they're more independent learners, right? They'll look for validation through their own knowledge and experience. They tend to rely on that experience. They prefer to think that through alone. They'll wait to say something till they're pretty sure. And they'll tend to focus in a debrief on what could be better. But the more interdependent learners, we tend to look for validation. That's right? We need that. We prefer that team environment because we're more engagers and relators who will actively seek that experience with others so that it broadens that. And when we debrief, we tend to focus on what went well. So those are the 5 HOP principles. Let's talk just a little bit about how we can have a little bit of a new view of incidents. So here's that new incident cycle, and part of it may look familiar to you. So we identify an incident. Then we have to understand that error is normal and we want to approach it that way. We're not seeking to blame. So the fact that error is normal makes us approach that in a different way because we understand that systems are what influences behavior. In other words, I'm not trying to blame somebody, I'm trying to find out what in the system drove that so that I can respond appropriately and analyze appropriately so that I get the learning. And this requires new leader knowledge, language, and behaviors. So the incident, the way we characterize it needs to be, what do we have that we don't want? I've got to use the science-based definitions that we talked about earlier: error, event, deviation, violation, active error, latent error. Because they're normalized and they're defined, we can more easily understand them. And instead of trying to blame, because blame fixes nothing, it's not about whose fault it is, it's about what those systemic drivers were that influence the behaviors that we can then respond to through some kind of leader response or analysis so that we can learn, and that learning is sustainable. We actually do learn it. So in the end, the big finish is that we can use the HOP principles to learn with intentionality. Remember, our leader knowledge, language, and behaviors. All of those are what drives sustainable improvements. We all hear about sustainability, but we have to do something to create it. And what you do is you learn to use systems, models, and processes. If you learn to use systems, models, processes, and tools, your workforce will use it. If you don't, your workforce won't. So 2 years from now, you'll still be talking about why we're not getting the outcomes we want because your language, knowledge, and behaviors weren't driving. We have to make sure that we learn to manage and be aware of our personality tendencies to get the most out of learning. And it's not just about understanding. We have to be self and team aware. We have to understand that people on our team may learn different than we do. Earlier we talked about one of the typical reactions to a failure is sending out a memo for a lessons learned. I think we've learned over the last hour or so that there's different ways that people have to do that learning. So thinking that that's the only thing that's going to fix it doesn't make any sense anyway. Because learning is really only complete when the organizations change, when the behaviors and the knowledge of the leader in the organization change, and then that becomes the new sustainable normal. See, these aren't just HOP principles. They're HOP behaviors. They're things that we know, things we say, things that we can do, things that need to be practically applied to get the outcomes that we want. I really appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you. You can look up more on these if you type in to any search engine online.improvewithfit.com and you go to the insights and speeches. Everything that we've talked about is in a 2 to 5 minute video, or you can watch this and share this with others. On behalf of myself, Rob Fisher, and my partner, Lewis Sr. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this. If you have any questions, please let us know. And remember, intentionality starts with you.